How do you make sure that when you cut a trunk, it heals over? In this video I'll show you on a couple of trees how I cut back a tree and then help the wound healing over. Cutting back big trunks is a common practice in bonsai. We let the tree grow out and then cut it back so you get taper, you get a very nice fat base without having a very tall tree. This can however go wrong. As you can see here, this was cut back. It was a huge garden plant and I collected it and I cut this trunk off. And you see here the bark has completely died back. That is not nice. This is Jelle, growing bonsai. Stay tuned, let's get into the garden. You'll see me use a couple of tools. A saw, a big knob cutter, a big concave pruner, a good carpet knife. These tools are pretty much all that you need. On top of that, cut paste, liquid or either much thicker cut paste putty is needed to help the wound heal over. What it does, it helps the cambium stay humid and therefore it doesn't dry out and therefore it can grow from the cut side directly instead of 2 or 3 millimeters in, and it just helps with the healing process. Now here we have a linden that over winter I made a cut. And I made this cut over winter because I didn't know where it would sprout along the trunk. I had this little branch here that I wanted to use. You can see here now it has had some drought damage. It has been very dry for the first month. But the buds are swelling again, so I can just remove these little leaves and consider cutting all the way back to here. I do this because if I cut here straight away and this bud doesn't sprout, then the whole trunk might die back. Now we are in the middle of summer, well actually early summer, it is late May. And you can see now this tree is growing well, so there's no real risk of dying back. This is a reason for making a rough cut in the middle of winter and then doing a fine, smooth cut in the middle of the growing season. There's still months of growth left, so the tree is now full of energy and can quickly start repairing. Now what I do, I'm planning on making just a nearly horizontal cut and hopefully it will heal over nice and smoothly. So let me first remove this leader. And of course where you cut back to is a very personal choice, right? It depends on your vision for the tree. And I use a very fine-toothed saw for this, starting just above the side branch. You see a little bit of a slant. This is a fairly rough-barked, thick-barked species, so it will grow quite well over this area. But I am going to make this a little bit lower, so you get a more natural curve occurring once it heals over. And this is a personal choice, whether you do this or not. But I find if I round this off a little bit, the final result is much nicer. And then, because it is a thick bark species, I'm not going to have to do all that much besides this. It will grow a very thick callus around the trunk, smoothing out a lot of the unevenness. And with a knife I can of course aid the tree, make this a little bit nicer. Always cut from the outside in so that you don't push the bark off the wood. Of course the cambium sits between the bark and the wood. There is a tiny little layer of cells that is actually actively replicating, and that is also what's going to cause the callus to come over. Now this knife is not sharp enough anymore, you can actually see the rust on the knife. But just a smooth transition like this is sufficient for the wound to completely heal over in the next 2 or 3 years. I can do this now because I made a massive cut earlier in winter, right? So a lot of the sap flow has already been reduced from this stump and therefore the dieback risk is less. And then it's just a matter of making sure that particularly these edges are protected from drying out. But I like to protect the whole surface as well from drying out. I find it just heals over more quickly in the first couple of weeks. And that's pretty much all there is to it. And here you see a linden where I did some of the work earlier on. This is a very big cut that I made a few years ago. And you can see there's only this little line here that shows that this was a cut, and a little bit of a pattern here in the bark. Similarly, here was a bit of a smaller cut that's also healing over. And here on the side, you can probably not see it, another one that has healed over. So this is realistic with bigger cuts. And as the tree ages, I expect this to heal over even more. And as the bark gets rougher, this will hardly be noticeable. Now it is important to realize that not all species heal over well. This is a boxwood, and I just made a horizontal cut. And this is all going to be dead wood. This is the future trunk. I need to work this into a dead wood feature because it won't heal over. Other trees that have this problem are pines or junipers. They don't typically heal over wounds. So look at creating a gin or shari if you make big cuts. One of the great examples of trees that heal over well is a trident maple. I've made a little cut here, and I've made a very nice smooth transition between the thicker part and the thinner part, so this can heal over. It's important to realize Japanese maples and trident maples are thin barked species. That means the bark is only very thin, and they will not heal over big hollows. So here it is important to make a smooth transition between the thicker and the thinner, so the bark can slowly grow over it, not leaving big lumps. So you don't want something sticking out, but you also don't want to make a very deep depression. Just make it smooth. And here another linden tree. This is of course the main tree. This is a cut that I made also in winter, and you see that quite successfully it has stopped this from sprouting, and this is what I've been doing throughout spring, so that this is not very strong. The reason why I want this is because this is the new leader, and I'm now going to make a cut and smoothen this transition out so that it can heal over. And to do that, I'm first going to make a cut just removing the section, and then I'm going to clean it up with hand tools. So I had to make a two-sided cut, otherwise I would have made a very long cut. And now I can, around these edges, using my knob cutter, start to remove the leftover ridge, so that also here you get a smooth transition. The smoother the transition is now, the easier it is for the bark to grow over, and the quicker it will be hidden from view what you've done here. This of course is a cut on the back of the future tree, but still, I want it closed. I've made this a little bit deeper than the edges, so that once this starts growing over, we don't get a bulb, but it is a little bit of a depression, which in the end will look nicer. I've cleaned this out mostly. I want living tissue as much as possible, because that is what the trunk heals over most easily. No edges, no edges. Right. Now it can't dry out anymore, and the healing process can start. This will take 4, maybe 5 years to heal over. But this is an elm where I made this cut in winter. It has grown really well. You can see here already the bark is trying to push over this wound. So now I have a decision to make. Am I going to smoothen this out? Or, and that is what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to go much lower. This was cut just quickly. There were no side branches here. Most of this has grown over this year. And now I can decide, do I want to go lower? Could I go to this or that or even that? And now if you are doing trunk chops, it is important to understand why. You want taper and you want movement in your trunk. And then typically the lowest cut is always the best. The lower I cut now, the more extreme the movement, the more extreme the taper in the base. And this will have to grow really fat anyway to heal over this wound. And then I'm going to make another cut in a smaller section of the trunk here. And another one there. So I get 3 or 4 cuts before I have this trunk line. So this needs to be as low as possible. And now if it was midwinter, I would have said I'm just going to cut here. And then later in spring I'll do this cut from there. But now because we're in the middle of the growing season, I'm going to try and cut this straight away in the right angle. This is where I want to cut. Now we are still early growing season and elm is very strong. So I'm not going to do all that much. This is very thick barked and very strong growing species. So I'm just going to cover this up and be done with it for the season. Just let it grow. Make sure you cover also the edge of the bark. The transition between the bark and the trunk is the most important part to be covered. And of course, this little piece, if you know me a little bit, this is of course something that you could still use, right? You could just prune this a little bit, plant it in some water and see what it will root. Let me just for the fun of it do it and show you a little update later on. Well, this was a very short how-to because it is the right time to make these cuts. It is early growing season, so mid-spring, late spring even, and in summer you get another push which will aid tremendously in healing these scars. I will do an update video at some point, but this was it for now.